Hi, engineers. Today we are going to introduce you to a friend of SparkShop, Dr. Eve L. Ewing, who is the author of Maya and the Robot. Dr. Eve Ewing is also a professor, a researcher, a poet, and a former science teacher, and she's here today to answer your questions about her book. Dr. Ewing, to kick us off, we'd love to hear what is one invention that you cannot live without?
Oh gosh, one invention that I cannot live without is the binder clip. These guys, people just use them for paper, but I use them for everything. I think they're so cool, and you shouldn't pinch them on yourself. But if you're fidgety like me, you can play around with them. But I also use them to clip like snacks and things that I put in the fridge. So I love binder clips.
My name is Kaylin. I go to Netherhorst, and why were you so interested in science at the beginning of your career?
Thank you for that question, Kaylin. I've always been curious about the world around me. And when I was Maya's age, I was really into bugs and space and grass and dirt and buildings and basically anything that I could see by looking up in the sky or looking around at the world. And that's part of why I became a writer too, is I like to pay close attention to the world. And so science became one way to understand that world a little bit better and to think about all the questions that we still haven't answered about the planet we live in and the space beyond.
My name is Hugh from Netherhorst School. I was wondering what inspired you to write Maya and the Robot.
Thanks, Hugh. It's really great to meet you. I wrote Maya and the Robot because I know you probably have experienced, like, sometimes when kids are really young, they get obsessed with a certain topic. So some kids are obsessed with dinosaurs or obsessed with trains or obsessed with baseball. And I have a niece, and when she was starting around 2 or 3 years old, she became obsessed with robots. I don't know why, like out of the blue. It's not like she saw a robot movie or TV show. She just became like super into robots. And so there was an exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry, just like the exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry in the book. And this was an exhibit about robots. And so I took her to Hyde Park to the Museum of Science and Industry, and she walked around and kept putting her arm around this one robot in the exhibit and talking to it. And it was so funny because she was like in preschool. It was funny to see this little preschool kid talking to this robot at this museum. And a little while later, several weeks later, we were driving by the museum, and she was in the backseat of my car. And she said, I just wish I could have a robot to go everywhere with me and be my friend. And when she said that, it was like, oh, it felt like a punch in the chest. I thought, wow, that's such a funny thing to say, and kind of like a sad thing, but also a really sweet thing to say. And sometimes as a writer, you really struggle to come up with good ideas, but sometimes an idea pops into your head. And when she said that, I had this image of a girl, a bigger girl, a grown-up girl, and her best friend who was a robot. And on that day, Maya and Ralph popped into my head, and they would not leave. And they wouldn't get out of my brain until I sat down and tried to write this story about them. And so I feel really grateful. And now my niece is much older. She's almost Maya's age. And obviously Maya is a fictional character. She's not exactly like my niece, but I have to thank her for the inspiration that popped into my head that day.
My name is Damien. I go to McClellan. My question for Eve is Maya a real person?
Thanks for your question, Damien. Maya is not a real person. Well, she's real in my heart. She's very real to me, but she's not a real person who walks around in real life. She is partially named after the poet Maya Angelou, who's a very famous poet. And also, when I was a little kid, there was a cartoon on TV called Maya and the Bee that I really liked. Maya the Bee. And so I really liked the name Maya. I had a friend named Maya in elementary school that I also liked. I just think it's a lovely name. So Maya is a fictional person. And she is her and all her friends are kind of like combinations of different people that I've known in my life, people that I've met. And there are some ways in which Maya is a little bit like me and inspired by the things I experienced as a young person growing up in Chicago. But no, she's pretend, except in my heart and my brain.
Hi, my name is Miracle Harris, and I go to Amelia Earhart School. My question to Eve is, how can I become a writer just like you?
Thank you so much for that question, Miracle. I have awesome news, which is that you can do better than becoming a writer just like me. If you want to be a writer, you can be a writer just like you. And part of how I became a writer is I read and 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 read everything. But some of the favorite things that I love to read were things written by other authors from Chicago. And one of the things that taught me is that no matter where you come from, no matter what neighborhood you're from, no matter what your family situation is, your story is important. And the things that you have to talk about are important. And so I loved reading adventures, when I was a kid, but I didn't read a lot of stories about, kids in Chicago. I didn't read a lot of stories about kids who grew up on a block like my block where, people, and the block that Maya lives on is inspired by my, neighborhoods growing up in Chicago, where people work all types of jobs and where there are block parties and where there are multiple generations of families and people speaking different languages. And, my parents weren't married when I was a kid, and I wanted to depict a family that, where the parents aren't married, but they get along and they handle their business and they do what they have to do to take care of Maya and Amir. And so, the great thing is I'm waiting for the miracle book, and you are going to write the miracle book. And if you love things that you feel like nobody else loves, if you have questions and experiences and stories that you feel like you've never seen, only you are the expert on that. And I can't wait to see how you tell that story. The other part you have to do is, you have to record your ideas some type of way. And so that can mean, for a lot of writers, writing them in a notebook. I carry a notebook with me all the time. I write notes in my phone. It can be using a voice memo or voice recording. It can just be talking to other people about the ideas that you have. But, keeping track of those ideas is really important. And the other most important thing about being a writer is not giving up when your writing is bad the first time around. A lot of us, when we write something, we look at it and we're like, this is not very good. But the thing is, you can't compare it to somebody else's finished product. So let's say you wanted to bake a cake. If you put flour and cocoa powder and eggs and milk in a bowl and you stirred it all up and you said, this isn't cake, this is terrible, and you threw it in the trash, that would miss the whole point, right? To make it a cake, you have to put it in the oven. You have to wait. You have to give it time. And I think sometimes as beginning writers, we write our first idea and then we look at it and we're like, this is terrible. This isn't good, instead of baking it. And as a writer, baking it means taking your time with it, getting feedback, letting other people read it, letting them give you advice, putting it away, coming back to it a few days later, getting other ideas. And I think a lot of writers quit because the thing that they wrote isn't perfect the first time. And nothing that I've ever written has ever been perfect, or honestly, even that good the first time. And the way I became a writer is by sticking with it and not giving up. And so I hope you'll do the same so that I can read your book someday.
My name is Miasia, and I go to Oscar Preschool. And my question for Ewing is, have you ever built a robot?
Thank you so much for that question, Miasia. I have never built a robot in real life. I built a robot with words, which was pretty fun and didn't require any materials. But one day I would love to build an awesome robot, or maybe one day you'll build a cool robot and I'll get to meet them. But I've never built a robot except on the page.